Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 395, and today's date is June 19th, 2014. And the title of this episode is The Central Bankers' U.S. Government Strategic Plan for the Middle East. Now, they do have a plan. It might not be going as well as they wanted, but we're going to discuss this a little bit later in this report. I put a whole section together, and we're going to go through the timeline and what's going on in Iraq and what we can expect and what false flags are headed our way. But let's get into the economic collapse news. We'll get through that first, and then we'll get into that section. And we see that the initial jobless claims, they have been posted, and these claims are at the new 7-year lows. And of course, the government has the ability to manipulate job numbers. They have the ability to manipulate GDP, inflation, and what we're seeing is that every single thing that has to do with the government where they can manipulate it, it's showing us we're in a recovery. Everything outside of their control, like real estate sales, if you look at retail sales, retail stores closing, sales in companies, it's very difficult to manipulate that type of information. Of course, they most likely can try, but the news kind of gets out there, and it's very difficult to do, and it's hard to keep that illusion alive. And what we're seeing right now is, of course, real estate is imploding. We see retail is falling apart. More and more stores are closing. Sales in stores are not doing well, and we're also seeing that Caterpillar, their Asian sales have cratered by 30%, and their worldwide sales have cratered to 12%. This is 18 months of declining annual sales. This is not a good sign of how the economy is doing. We also see the Baltic Dry Index again down. We're seeing this happen. This is another indicator that the economy is not doing well. And of course, the Fed is out there, the U.S. government's out there, and they're saying that we are in a recovery. Everything seems to be doing well. It might have slowed a little bit, but don't worry. We're in this fantastic recovery. And the other day I reported on the Fed. They're introducing an exit type of fee on bonds. And what's very interesting about this is that they want to prevent a bond run during the collapse situation, and that's why they put the exit fee on there. But if you really think about this, by putting the exit fee on the bonds right now when you sell them, wouldn't more people try to get out of bonds before the exit fee is there and take that money and put it into the stock market? I mean, they might be starting a bond run right now to convince everyone, of course, when they create this event of another country or group hitting the United States with a false flag event, blaming them for the collapse, but this could be their initial set-off of the collapse of the economy. Taking the money out of the bond market, people moving, they need to put it someplace, they put it into the stock market, pumping that up, and of course that's going to completely pop and collapse in itself. We already know that real estate, retail, jobs, they're all suffering. Everything's declining, and we can see already the Fed and many other financial institutions are telling us that the GDP numbers are being downgraded. They're not seeing the growth that they thought they were going to see. We're not seeing that takeoff that they thought, which I never believed we were going to see one. Actually, I always thought it was going to be worse than the first quarter. And of course, as we know, the GDP numbers had nothing to do with the weather. We all know that. We know that this economy is completely failing. We know this debt around the world cannot be sustained. Europe's in turmoil. The United States is right there. But of course, with all the government numbers, they can manipulate them and create the illusion we're in this recovery. And what's very interesting, we're placing all these sanctions on Russia, not really Russia itself, individuals and certain companies, and the corporate media is out there letting us know that, you know, Russia's suffering, they're doing terrible, United States is doing very, very well. But what we're seeing right now is Russia's GDP, they're going to revise their GDP up because they're seeing more investment, they're seeing more growth. Here in the United States, we're seeing the opposite, where they were telling us GDP was 3%, and now they're lowering it down to 2.8, now to 2.1, and our GDP in the previous quarter was in the negative range. Of course, they told it was a positive 0.5%, and then they revised it once to negative 1.1. They revised it again, negative 1.6. So we can see where the United States economy is going, and we see where the Russian economy is going. And of course, the corporate media, the government, always seems to tell us the opposite of what is really happening. And that goes pretty much with everything: the economy, the wars that are going on around the world, and why we are there. It is completely always the opposite, and they will never tell us the real truth of what is going on. And of course, they don't want to tell us the truth because they really don't think that highly of the people of America. They think they're above us. They think of us as just workers, slaves, to do what they want. We shouldn't question their authority. We shouldn't question the government. We shouldn't do anything except do what they want, and that's all they care about. And what we're seeing right now is that drones now, as we know, are, of course, everywhere. Right now they have cameras on them, but we're seeing that drones are now being fitted with pepper spray, paintball devices, and eventually they'll be armed with real weaponry. The Skunk Riot Control Copter, built by South African company Desert Wolf, has a suite of cameras and 4 paintball guns strapped to its chassis to help its operators monitor and control unruly crowds. The guns can fire ammunition from 4 different hoppers, meaning the drone operators can shoot protesters with dye markers, solid plastic pellets, and small capsules of pepper spray. And we will definitely see these coming here to the U.S. UK will see them, and everyone else where they need to control the situation. They will probably most likely see these drones being purchased, and they're going to use this for when the time comes. And we know that when the time comes, we will realize it, because we will see the value of the dollar continually decrease. We will see prices in the stores and everywhere start to inch up. And when I say start to inch up, I don't mean like by 30 cents. I'm talking you're going to go to the store and today milk is $4. You're going to go 2 days later, it's going to be 8, then it's going to be 12, then it's going to be 20, and it's going to increase very, very quickly. Now, Barack Obama is pretty much using a Department of Homeland Security directive called Operation Vigilant Eagle. This is aimed at scrutinizing the behavior of veterans as a means of weeding out political dissent. Now, we understand the Department of Justice already has this new task force to go after homegrown extremists. They're also painting a picture of what those anti-government people are like. They're using that guy in Nevada as the poster child for this. They're calling themselves sovereign citizens. That's what the government's actually painting them as, sovereign citizens, these people that have anti-government views. But this program, Operation Vigilant Eagle, the program claims to be trying to help veterans who are disgruntled, disillusioned, or suffering from the psychological effects of war. But the most troubling of these newly coined psychological effects of war is oppositional defiance disorder. Symptoms include the questioning of authority, the refusal to follow directions, stubbornness, the unwillingness to go along with the crowd, and the practice of disobeying or ignoring orders. Persons may also receive such a label if they are considered free thinkers, nonconformists, or individuals who are suspicious of large centralized government. You see what they're doing here. They are preparing to round up all these veterans and say they have this problem. Some critics view the process of declaring such persons emotionally unfit as a major step toward designating all so-called right-wing extremists as mentally ill. And as you know, that they are trying to do this to label the veterans where they can't own a weapon, where they might be a problem in the near future, because you have to remember the government is very nervous about the veterans. They are highly trained. They know how to use weapons. They know strategically and military strategic operations. They know how to win battles, they know how to maneuver, and they are very worried about these type of peoples. And this is why they're putting this all together, trying to classify these people so they can put them on a list to disarm them, to declare them mentally ill. And they are using this directive called Operation Vigilant Eagle to do this to these people. And this is the next step, and they're trying to do this, and you can see from everything that they've been doing with their lists, with their vast databases of correlating data and creating social profiles on the American people, they realize we are headed toward this crash. And you can see they are definitely prepping for this. They are preparing to come down and pick up those people who are labeled. And this is what they're trying to do. This is why you have the task force. This is why DHS is doing this at this point. Of course, like I said before, when everything goes completely bad, where the economy collapses, you're going to see DHS activated, all the local law enforcement are going to come into compliance, and then you'll see their tanks, the armored men. You will see everything at that point. Now, out in Russia, what we're seeing right now is that NATO is now saying that Russia is again building up troops on the border. Now, it always seems that this happens because what happened was Petro Poroshenko has said, let's have a truce, and this is the way the truce is going to work. You're going to lay down, the southeastern section is going to lay down their weapons. They're going to give up and come into the fold of Ukraine. And of course, the southeast section said, that's ridiculous. We're not going to do that. And then all of a sudden, the truce was canceled, and everything went back to the way it was. And now NATO is all of a sudden out there saying, oh my God, see what happened? Russia's involved. They're mounting troops. We have pictures. We know for a fact it's thousands and thousands of military men building up. And of course, this is propaganda, as they always do. They're building up, demonizing Russia because they realize what is coming. World War III. They want the American people and the people around the world to realize that Russia, China are the enemies, and this is why they're continually doing this and building the propaganda up over and over. Now, the leader of the self-proclaimed People's Republic of Lugansk has said that the plane that was shot down in Ukraine, the IL-76, where Poroshenko is saying that, 69 people died, they are saying that plane was actually empty, and they have proof that there was absolutely no one on board of that plane. And again, I hate to say this, people are fighting for their freedoms. Poroshenko is bombing, sending in troops to bring these people under control. Does everyone think that everyone is fighting with slingshots? No, this when war happens, or this type of civil war, people get hurt. People are fighting for their freedoms. So for him to come out, Poroshenko to come out and say, this is disgusting, I can't believe this. Well, what about the white phosphorus? What about the bombing and the killing of women and children? What about the people in the Odessa office where they shot people at point blank? None of that's coming out. But again, this is all covered up by the corporate media. They really don't want you to understand what's going on in Ukraine. And of course, everything is intensifying. Nothing is getting better, and it's actually getting worse. And this is the way the central bankers actually want this, because they've been told, take control of the country or you don't get their money. And in the meantime, they're building up military assets all around the area, encircling Russia, and we can see this is starting to escalate even further as time goes on. Now, a couple reports ago, I reported on Uganda, where they said they stopped this terrorism group, and it was being funded by the United States, and they are still in the search of this terrorist group because they were planning on something. But it's very interesting, during this same time period, Uganda plans to invite 6 Chinese companies next month to compete for a $8 billion worth of contracts to expand the country's railway network and help improve trade routes with 4 bordering nations. And I've said this before, but it's very interesting. The timing is always the same time period when these African nations are making deals with China. All of a sudden we have this terrorist attack. During the Al-Shabaab Kenya mall attack, they were making a deal, Kenya was making a deal with China to become the clearinghouse of the yuan. Same thing in Sudan. They were making a deal to bring in billions of dollars to build up the infrastructure and to help extract the oil from the Sudan region. And it seems like every single time China is there, the central bankers are saying, let's start something, and we need to get into that area. Uganda signed an agreement with Chinese government giving companies from the Asian nation exclusive rights to lead the project. And bidding documents will be ready by July 10th, and we are inviting only Chinese companies. So we can see how this is playing out, and we can see why there was this terrorist group funded by an outside source, United States government, CIA, to really wreak havoc in that area. Now, I've always said that malware has been placed in the stock exchange, in the NASDAQ. They've created kill switches to stop the systems coming down. And this is all in preparation for the false flag event to bring the economy down, because I've said this many times, the central bankers, U.S. government, are not going to be blamed for this collapse. They need to blame this on someone else. But what's very interesting today is that hackers slowed down high-speed trading at a large hedge fund last year and rerouted information about the company's trades to off-site computers. The hack went undetected for 8 weeks, and there was malicious malware in the systems. Hackers penetrated a large hedge fund, the BAE Systems. The BEA says hackers stalled high-speed trades. Attacks delayed trades by milliseconds. Hackers said to seek monetary gain in an attack on hedge fund. Hedge funds had training slowed by hackers in 2013. Hackers rerouted high-speed trading information, and attack on hedge fund went undetected for 8 weeks. This is what they're reporting, and right now the FBI, the New York police, everyone's called in to find out what is going on here. And I'm telling you right now, all of this is being placed and is already set to go to bring down the system. And this is what they've been prepping for. This is what they're getting ready for. Now, let's get into Iraq and what is going on there. And I wanted to go back in time a little bit so we can get a complete picture of what has been happening. Back, of course, we went into Iraq because they told us that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And of course those weapons of mass destruction were never found because it was a complete lie. They went in there because Saddam Hussein got permission from the UN to sell the oil not using the US dollar. Of course, the central bankers, the United States government, said absolutely not. They went into Iraq. As soon as they went in there, they captured the oil fields first, the refineries, and quickly put everything into play where everything is going to be sold using the US dollar. And at that time, Bush backed Maliki, and he says he has the full support of the United States government. And what happened was, in October 2nd of 2009, Maliki's coalition did not draw the Sunni support that many had expected it would. He lost the backing of Mohammed al-Mashadini, the former parliament speaker, and more important, they lost the Sunni or secular blocs or parties that could have delivered him broader support in Sunni provinces, and Maliki completely lost the support of the Sunnis during this period. So he had no support with the Sunnis. On November 10th, 2010, Maliki, to retain power as Iraqi leaders, reached new government deal. The White House welcomed Maliki. The apparent agreement to form an inclusive government is a big step forward for Iraq. The National Security Advisor to Vice President Joe Biden said, the administration's point man for Iraq, all along we said the best result would be a government that reflects the results of the elections, includes all the major blocs representing Iraq's ethnic and sectarian groups, and that does not exclude or marginalize anyone. And some U.S. officials during this time back in 2010 said they had some worries about Maliki, that he did not have the Sunni support back then, and this could be a problem. But the United States government said it's not a big deal because he's protecting the oil fields, he's protecting the refineries, he's keeping the oil being priced out in dollars and sold across the world, and of course he's getting a piece of the action, so he's going to keep this up. It doesn't matter what else he does in the country as long as he protects that, and we are completely fine with that. December 12th, 2011. This is the White House. Today, I am proud to welcome Prime Minister Maliki, the elected leader of a sovereign, self-reliant, and democratic Iraq. We're here to mark the end of this war, to honor the sacrifices of all those who made this day possible. This is coming from President Obama. So back in December 12, 2011, Obama welcomed Maliki, gave him full support. It's a sovereign nation, and we all love him. Why? Because he's protecting the oil, he's protecting the U.S. dollar, so who cares what he does? Now, during this same time, in December 28th of 2011, Iraq's deputy prime minister accuses Maliki of acting like a dictator amid fears of chaos and civil war. Less than 24 hours after the U.S. military withdrew the last of its occupation forces from Iraq, Prime Minister Maliki ordered an arrest warrant for Vice President Tariq al-Hashimi on terrorism charges. Maliki, a Shiite, leveled the charges against the highest-ranking Sunni in the government, a move that threatens to drag the country back into sectarian bloodshed such as what occurred in 2006 and 2007 and led to tens of thousands of Iraqis being killed. Now let's move forward to July 3rd of 2012. Prime Minister Maliki: harassment and persecution of anyone deemed a threat to himself or his party has dramatically reduced freedom throughout Iraq. The Iraqi state cannot provide basic services including electricity in the summer, clean water, decent health care. Meanwhile, unemployment among young men hovers close to 30%, making them easy recruits for criminal gangs and militant factions. Again, the United States government doesn't care. He's protecting the oil, the U.S. dollar. We fully back Maliki, I should say. The White House fully backs Maliki. No problems there. Those who cross Maliki may be held in secret camp, honor detention facility in the Green Zone, where they are tortured to extract confessions, after which they are sent off to legally sanctioned prisons. Parker writes that Red Cross found evidence of systematic torture and gross mistreatment, including rape, electric shock to the genitals. In addition, U.S. officials found prison security officers seeking bribes to release prisoners. So we can see at this point, back in July 3rd, 2012, things were not going well. He was a dictator. He tortured people. He killed people. And it was mostly at the Sunnis. But, of course, the White House and the government, they didn't care as long as he was protecting the dollar and the oil being sold in the country. On December 28th, 2012, tens of thousands of Iraqis have joined demonstrations against Maliki in the mainly Sunni province of Anbar. Angry Sunnis took to the streets after Friday prayers in Fallujah, Ramadi, chanting slogans against Maliki. Protests have intensified since the arrest last week of bodyguards of the Sunni finance minister. Opponents accuse Maliki of seeking to marginalize Iraq's Sunni political leaders. The government has succeeded in keeping the protests out of the public eye to an extent, says one of the correspondents who was reporting on the situation. Now, if we notice, we didn't hear much of this in the corporate media, of all these people protesting against the leader. Why? Because as long as he's keeping the oil flowing and selling it using the U.S. dollar, everything is fine. Now, everything started to get worse. Now, we're going to go to October 30th, 2013. Faced with the prospect of losing control of key parts of Iraq, Maliki is asking for more U.S. help on his Washington visit during this time. Cities such as Fallujah, Tel Afar, Mosul are all being infiltrated by al-Qaeda, he says. Of course, it's not al-Qaeda, it's the Sunnis in these regions. And he's saying that Iraqi army soldiers largely confined to their barracks. Local residents say that militants have more freedom of movement than police. And in Mosul, in northern Iraq, where government forces opened fire on anti-government protesters earlier this year, there have been significant desertions by Sunni police and soldiers in these cities. So the Sunni soldiers, the Sunni police have been deserting and saying, you know what, we're done with this. That's it. Of course, Maliki is going into these regions because there's been a rise up of the Sunni people. Now, during this same period of October 2013, moving into November, what has happened is Maliki met with President Obama, and he was telling him the situation. And it seems like different parts of Iraq that were extracting oil, they were selling oil not through Baghdad. And they had to go through Baghdad because they had to sell it using the US dollar. Maliki was getting a piece of the action. The central banks were getting a piece of the action. And it seemed like that they were selling this oil not going through the same system but giving the profits. But again, the central bankers were not getting it off the US dollar. And when you start selling the oil not using the US dollar, other countries do not have to hold the US dollar in reserves. So what has happened at this point, Washington came out and said that all oil sales must go through Baghdad. It cannot be sold separately. And this was a message to other groups inside Iraq. And of course, at this time, Maliki was losing control. On March 27th, 2013, now if you remember, Bush told us during this invasion of Iraq that we're going to be paying for the war from all the oil sales. And this report goes on to say that Bush administration officials suggested shortly after the invasion that revenue from the Iraq's oil fields could largely pay for the cost of rebuilding the country. And that turned out to be pretty much not correct, and it's completely wrong. $60 billion in American taxpayer funds ended up going into the reconstruction of Iraq. The war devastating Iraq's oil industry as kidnappings, sabotage, and attacks on infrastructure made it virtually impossible to do business. Oil from the region makes up just a small percentage of what America uses. The International Energy Agency expects China to become the main customer for Iraq's vast oil reserves. And the agency's chief economist recently declared a new trade axis is being formed between Baghdad and Beijing. So American oil companies were barely active in Iraq, and they didn't come in there and start rebuilding. It was actually the Chinese. And most of this oil does go to the Chinese and not to the U.S. So when they tell us that, oh my God, oil prices are going to go up here in the United States, well, we really don't get that much from Iraq. The reason why oil prices are going to be going up is because the value of the dollar, if it is sold not if the oil in Iraq is not sold using the dollar, we will see a devaluation of the dollar because most of the countries then will not have to hold the dollar. And this is why the IMF was out there saying that this could be catastrophic. And yes, this would spread to many different countries in the Middle East. Now we're going to fast forward to May 4th, 2014. The government of the United States on Sunday, it will not support any export of oil independently by any part of Iraq, but will support the government of Maliki. So we can see already other places, like I said before, this was going back to 2013, we're selling the oil not going through Baghdad, and Washington continually says this cannot happen. And they're still supporting Maliki at this time back in May of this year. And now on May 28, 2014, Maliki asks ISIS members to return to the government. What does he mean by that? Well, Maliki has asked those who have joined the ISIS group, or ISIL, to return to the federal government and join the Iraqi forces to destroy the main core group of ISIS. So some people went off to ISIS in Iraq, and he's asking those people to come back to fight them. In a speech about the security of Anbar, al-Maliki asked all the political parties to hold a conference about rebuilding Anbar province and asked those who have entered ISIS groups to return back to the government and Iraqi forces. Maliki said that the next stage of clearing out those who are left in ISIS will not take long. He asked all political parties and tribal groups to unite and declare jihad against al-Qaeda and ISIS. Actually, it wasn't really al-Qaeda. ISIS is saying, of course, the United States is saying it's a splinter group, but what I see happening is there was a core group of ISIS inside Iraq, and I see what was happening. Many of the soldiers, many of the people were joining up, and it was really turning into a Sunni group, and he was losing a lot of his forces to this rise in power. And when we look at this and we see what happened during this time period, and I mentioned this before, where troops, they just dropped their weapons, they went off. Well, most of them joined up with the Sunni insurgents. I mean, you can call them ISIL, ISIS. I'm going to call them the Sunnis. And we can see basically what happened here. ISIS was able to infiltrate Iraqi government ministry and has the support of members of Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party and other Sunni groups. So this is an uprising. Now, I believe the United States did send ISIS in there. They are, of course, funded by the United States government. They were trained by the United States government. They have passports to get into the United States. Some of them are American. And I think they sent a core group into Iraq to cause a disturbance because of what was going on there, and they saw oil being sold off. Maliki couldn't stop it, and they wanted to get something started. And all of a sudden, they didn't realize that this completely got out of hand, and they couldn't control it anymore because they didn't understand that the Sunni groups, the groups from Saddam Hussein, were really in control of what was going on. After Maliki's crackdown on the protest and realignment of ISIL and Sunni tribes became evident that they took control of Fallujah, Ramadi, and the rest of Anbar. Those groups have been waiting for an opportunity to exact revenge on the Maliki government, which they regard as a Shiite-dominated and divisive. They're divisive towards Sunnis. The collaboration between tribes and Ba'athists is not ideological, but revolves around a shared interest, which is to push the Maliki government out of power. Many Sunni soldiers in the Iraqi army quickly abandoned their posts, dropped their weapons, and joined the other side. And you can see that all of this was pretty much done without the U.S. really understanding what was going on. They thought they were in control of ISIS. They thought they paid them. They thought they armed them. And they thought they were going to use this core group to completely disrupt what was going on in Iraq and hopefully create terror there. But what we're seeing now is more government officials are out there calling this a civil war, a sectarian war, and it's getting further and further into that. And we can see right now that when the soldiers, dropped their weapons, they said they were called from higher-ranking officers to say, now, just drop your weapons and leave. And I think this was part of the U.S. plan to make it look like this ISIS group was just taking over and they didn't want any resistance from the Iraqi army. But what happened was, yes, some of them ran off, but others completely joined up and really swept through the region because they have the support of the Ba'ath group, they have support of the Sunnis, and it's taking on a life of its own right now, and it's not what they thought was going to happen. Now, Maliki, of course, is saying that he's not going to step down, and the U.S. government wants him to step down, and because things are getting out of control there. Other regions are selling the oil, not through Baghdad anymore. Maliki is losing control of the country, and the United States had some other plan. They wanted to use these terrorists to pretty much provoke a war into Syria because they wanted to create an instance where the United States could come into the situation. Now, they are still using this to their advantage, and they're still pushing their agenda at this time. So Maliki is not going to step down. He doesn't want to be removed from power, but of course the United States, of course, that supported him all the way up until this point, said, now you need to step down. Iraq veterans are saying, do not enter Iraq at this time. It's not going to help. We were there, and we should not intervene in Iraq whatsoever. Now, it looks like the Sunni insurgent group has taken control of the oil refinery in Baji. They've raised the ISIS militant black flag there. They have captured it, and now they are going after the oil fields. And of course they need to take control of all this. They're heading towards Baghdad, and we can see that this is growing bigger and bigger. More Sunnis are joining this entire group that is making leaps and bounds across. And of course the United States government, central bankers are looking at this and saying, listen, we can use this to our advantage. This is not how it was planned, but we can use this. We see that we asked al-Maliki to step down, but he will be removed eventually. We can use this to bring in and start a war and eventually get into Syria. And it looks like this is what they're trying to do now. President Obama is saying he can do whatever he wants. He doesn't need permission from Congress to go into Iraq. But yeah, he does. Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution gives the executive branch the command of the nation's armed forces, while Article 1, Section 8 gives the legislative branch the power to decide when the United States goes to war. And you have to remember, the only reason that the United States can use drones in Yemen because the Congress allows that if they're Al-Qaeda, and this is why they call everyone Al-Qaeda. The Congress said if they are Al-Qaeda, we can use and push them back and you can use drones. You have to remember, in Iraq right now, ISIS is not Al-Qaeda. They said it was a splinter group, and of course the United States trained them. They paid them. They gave them weapons, and they said they're not part of Al-Qaeda. It's a separate group, so they cannot use drones and just go in and attack them because it is not Al-Qaeda. And this is the problem they're having. They kind of screwed themselves with this. And what we don't know is that there's about 6,000 security backup forces, U.S. forces already in Iraq. The United States is keeping more than 6,000 security and backup forces in Iraq. Sources say these forces are former military members who have remained in the country after changing their official job title. So they kept people there. Now, what we're seeing now is Obama, who said there were no boots on the ground, he's sending in special forces, military advisors. It's not really boots on the ground because they're advisors, but they're ready for combat, and we can see that they're going in there to try to figure out what is going on, to bring back intelligence, and this is not going to go down well. Of course, what's going to happen is they need to get us into Iraq somehow, some way. And David Petraeus is out there saying he's warning Obama that this is a great risk militarily. With Iraq, the Army general who oversaw the U.S. military surge of troops into Iraq in 2007 issued a stark warning Wednesday on any further military action. The bottom line, he warns, this cannot be the United States being the Air Force for Shiite militias or Shiite on Sunni, because we are not getting involved in a sectarian war or a civil war. So we can see they're starting to realize that these are no longer terrorists. And I look around the corporate media, and what do I see? They're really not saying terrorism anymore. They're using the word Sunni. Very interesting. Now, the United States is behind this entire operation. It got out of control. They're having a sectarian civil war right now in Iraq, but they're trying to use this to their advantage. And their plan was to get into Syria and remove the borders in Syria and Iraq and divide them into Sunni, Shiite, and Kurds. This way they can maintain control. Each portion would have their own area, and they can continue with the oil flow on the U.S. dollar. But the problem is Syria is the problem, and they've always had this problem, and this is why they've been fighting in Syria all along. Now, this is a very difficult task to do with this plan to try to divide up the area, and I don't think they're going to be able to do it because Assad in that country right now is way too strong. He's been pushing out the rebels. That's pretty much over. So they're using this entire problem right now to their advantage because they're definitely going to go into Syria. And the only thing that is holding them back is how to get in there. They're not Al-Qaeda. They're now saying it's a sectarian Sunni civil war with the Shiites, so this poses a problem. Most of the Americans are saying we don't want to go to war. Congress is leaning toward no, we should not get involved with this right now. So there is a huge, huge problem. Secretary of State John Kerry said the insurgents in Iraq, of course he's calling insurgents. What happened to the word terrorists? That's very interesting. Are more extreme than Al-Qaeda and are a threat to the interest of the U.S. Now, they're always bringing that back, saying this group is a threat to the interest of the U.S. You have to remember, this group now is made up of the people in these cities who are Sunni, these people who were part of the Iraq forces, and they're really not a threat to the United States. They're using this for this event that they're building up, and they are trying to build this up quite a bit. Same thing in UK, European nations, they are building this up all over the place, saying that there's going to be another 9/11. And right now what we're seeing is that these insurgents, these terrorists, of course, this is saying, this is coming out of the Wall Street Journal, Sunni extremists. It's amazing how they went from terrorists to insurgents to Sunni extremists, and they can keep changing the title because it's very hard to prove, because the stories coming out of Iraq kind of conflict with what the corporate media was saying, because they're saying, well, our lives are a little bit better. Electricity staying on. We're not worried about Maliki coming in, dragging people off. So everything's starting to conflict in what the corporate media has been pushing out there. Sunni extremists in Iraq have occupied what was once Saddam Hussein's premier chemical weapons production facility, a complex that still contains a stockpile of old weapons, State Department and other U.S. government officials said. Now, they are really pushing this propaganda. They are pushing it, saying that now this group has chemical weapons. So you can see where they are going with this. The capture of the chemical weapons stockpile by the forces of the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, known as ISIS or ISIL, the militant group that is seizing territory in the country, has grabbed the attention of the U.S., and they are saying that they're going to use it here in the U.S. So you can see how they are pushing this agenda. They definitely want to bring some type of an event here in the United States. Now, I've been saying this for quite a while. They've been saying that Syria was the launch pad for terrorists, and here we have ISIS and ISIL, but we have to remember the United States trained them. They are also going to use them, of course, the core group that they can control, which are mostly Americans and partly part of the CIA and other organizations. They have passports to come back into the United States, and of course, as we know, they are in lone wolf groups all around the United States. They have been planning and already prepping what they're going to do here in the United States, and we will most likely see some type of power grid hit that will bring the system down, maybe some type of dirty new chemical weapon go off all around the country, because this is going to have to be a lot bigger than 9/11 to get us back into Iraq, then into Syria. And of course, this poses a huge, huge problem, because who is waiting on the other side? China and Russia, and this will definitely bring us into World War III, and they realize we are at the end game and they need to go all out at this time, and this is why they're going to use the doomsday cyber attack, which will bring down the financial institutions, some of the power grid. They will use physical attacks on the power grid, and a lot of cities are going to lose power. We're also going to see attacks with dirty nukes and chemical weapons hit many, many different cities. This is going to be huge. We might even see, because I saw on CNN, they're bringing back the flight that disappeared, the MH370 flight that completely disappeared. They're saying that they have new computer models where they're searching for it, so they're keeping it fresh in our minds. Do you see what they are doing? They are preparing for something which is going to be about 10 times worse than 9/11, because let me say, this is the only way pretty much that they can bring us back into Iraq, unless Obama just says, you know what, I'm doing it anyhow, or forces or kind of uses the NSA to blackmail all of Congress to say, let's go to war. Any other way, how are we getting there? Nobody wants to be involved in Iraq at this time. And if they just let it go, guess what happens? They take the refineries, which they've done. They take the oil ports, the oil fields, which they're going after. Countries will be buying the oil, not using the dollar. The dollar then will head back to the United States. The economy will start imploding on itself. The economy will start to crash, and we will all turn to our government and to the central bankers and say, you caused this. This was your system. It's time to get rid of you. And they're not going to let that happen. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.